Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to transition now to our very first dialogue with Trialogue, which we always have as part of our program, and a key highlight on the second day. It's how we kick off the day and almost gives us a frame and a state of the state of what is happening in the CSI space. I'm going to not lead with what I typically do, which is setting of the context. I think everybody understands the context of what some of the big trends that are at play, and we'll tease them out of the conversation. And so I'm going to invite my three speakers to kindly please join me on stage. Nicky Rockey, Trialogue Managing Director, is with us. I'd like Professor Bhekinkosi Moyo, who's also with us. Prof. Moyo is the Director and Adjunct Professor at CAPSI, which is the Center on African Philanthropy and Social Investment that sits at the University of the Witwatersrand. And then Thandeka Nkambule from Sanlam. Thank you very much, Thandeka. And Thandeka is Chief Transformation Officer at Sanlam. Thank you very much. And of course, Sanlam, just a quick reminder, was the winner of the 2025 Trialogue Strategic CSI Award, and this was for its Youth for Tourism initiative, which we'll talk about a little bit. Well done. Yeah, well done. I like the gender balance. We'll forget that it's not matching on the screen. That's absolutely okay. What we've typically done in all of the conversations up until this point is that we've kicked off with the poll, but I'm going to break the pattern a little bit, because I think the poll that we've just did collectively in the room is just as important in this conversation. And then what we'll do is we'll end off with the poll that we're supposed to start off with in this conversation. And Nick, I maybe want to start off with you, because the question I want to bring actually links a comment that came from the reflection yesterday as we closed the day, and allows us to bring that reflection into today. What we do know is that the environment is quite volatile. We saw that in that poll that there is reference to geopolitical instability. There are economic pressures. There are social pressures. What I'm interested in is, how is this reshaping how CSI actually sits inside companies? Is it being seen as discretionary spend, risk mitigation, or is it a strategic lever for resilience? And the reason why I say this links to a comment that was made yesterday was that a lady, I think it was Google, stood up yesterday and said, nothing's changing. We're having the same conversation over and over. So I'd like you to bring that arc of both what's happening in the moment right now, but what's the long horizon that you're seeing in terms of where CSI is evolving to?
Thank you. So, I think we've been speaking about these shifts in CSI to a more leveraged strategic space. And that language is familiar. We've been talking about that for years. I think the difference is, and it really came through quite strongly yesterday, is that language is now kind of mainstream. We're talking about catalytic capital like it's an old friend, It's the amount of time systemic change was mentioned yesterday. So I think the language has shifted, but we also, I believe, are seeing practices shift as well.
Yeah.
We Parza looked at a series of case studies on collective impact, which is a form of collaboration. We're doing the same thing. We're doing case studies on that. And we're finding real life examples of outcomes-based funds, collective processes. We're finding examples of projects where CSI or philanthropy money has fed into let's say a community farming project, followed up by impact capital coming through on the back of that. So where these examples are starting to take place, I think you're actually seeing a real shift. And to your question just about the discretionary side and the economic impact, and it was an interesting slide that came out here. And I was not surprised. I felt that was kind of how I would see the
Can
situation.
we pull it up, please, again, technical team, just that poll? Yes, go ahead, Nick.
Yes, obviously when there are economic pressures, discretionary funds going to come under pressure. But if CSI is more strategic, and we strongly believe there's a case to make it strategic where there's a business and a developmental benefit, and there are multiple business elements that you can justify through a CSI program if it is strategic.
Yeah.
not just the compliance and not just a tick box and not just a reputation driver, and how it can actually feed into risk processes, how it can actually make competitive differences. If your CSI programs meet those or tick those boxes, they're not going to be cut. They're going to be a lot more stable. They're not going to be as fickle. They're going to endure for longer, and the budgets are going to come through. We're seeing, I think, even in this turmoil, that there's a general holding of CSI. Obviously, it changes from one company to the next. But generally, we see that there's a marginal growth even through these difficult times through CSI programs. And I think the strategic levers are partly responsible for that.
And so what I'm almost hearing you say, Nick, is perhaps two things. One is there actually has been a positive evolution as you talk about the mainstreaming of CSI, not only just the language, but the significance of CSI. And what I'm hearing you say that even with the economic pressures, macro pressures, micro pressures, the marginal growth is indicative of CSI actually being expected to play a more strategic role and to actually close some of those gaps that are emerging. I want to build on that. I want to maybe just jump to you, Prof, on this a little bit, and to ask us to take us a little bit into the global philanthropy space. I've had the privilege of moderating you in different parts of the world where this has really been the key conversation, the retreat of global capital, the retreat, I wouldn't even call it a hesitation, but an absolute retreat of donor funding around the space. I'm interested in two things. One, what you think of this poll as we see it, but two, what that retreat means for the opportunity for corporates to, especially, and I'm going to talk about corporates in South Africa because we're here, what that means for corporates in terms of the opportunity to step in and play in some of those vacuums that have been created.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I wanted to start on a celebratory mood. I just asked Kathy, how many times have you done this? And she said 19 times.
Yeah.
And I'm raising that because we existing in an environment where support and aid, as we know it, has been redrawn. The aid map has been redrawn in such drastic ways that it has given us some patterns which I think are important, and they do speak to some of the results that came from the poll, which seem to be suggesting a bit of almost we are not connected to the global world in many ways, especially if you look at what really drives CSI according to the poll. I'm sure maybe if you do it later, the results will change, because the global configurations of aid and the aid architecture and developmental assistance has completely changed. And what we see currently is that there's a rise of other new players that are on the horizon. So, for example, the rise of China, the Gulf and Persian states are really beginning to play, or are expected to play massive roles, both from the point of view of their bilateral assistance, but also from their corporate practices. But we also see that also from countries such as Brazil, India, among others. China is the second contributor right now as we speak to the United Nations, and that has implications for how new rules are going to be drawn. And those rules have implications on what we do even on this part of the continent. So there are huge expectations that have risen, firstly on high net worth individuals. High net worth individuals are expected increasingly to close the gap that has been created by the withdrawal, not just of USAID and American support, but overall, over the last 10 years, we have actually been witnessing a slow but dramatic decline in terms of overseas development assistance. But the other expectation is for the multilaterals to also close that gap. And I'm sure you have seen the Africa Development Bank has actually even recruited somebody who used to work in Asia. And the idea is that we will start looking towards the East as opposed to our usual global North. And then, of course, the other expectation is that the private sector must actually come to close those gaps that have been created by the withdrawal of these donors. And over the last couple of years, over the top 20 corporate givers globally, pharmaceuticals have actually been the top 4 in terms of that. And so I think there's something to look into that in terms of the role that pharmaceuticals are playing when it comes to corporate social investment. But I think there are certain expectations and also the role that the private sector ought to play in this current moment. And I think a lot of this could have been covered yesterday, but I want to highlight a few. The first is that we're expecting the corporate to have a soul. A corporate to have a soul, right? And I'm saying this because I've just been following a lot of what's happening with different corporates. And in particular, I don't know how many of you follow the work of Safaricom, which is a subsidiary, I think, of Vodacom, but in Kenya. A couple of years ago, Safaricom hired somebody called Bhekinkosi Moyo. He's late now. And of late, people have been going back and resuscitating videos of Bhekinkosi Moyo and saying, even though Safaricom is implementing great ideas, it's not the same. They are lacking that touch that Bhekinkosi Moyo had, which had purpose, people, and profits. And I think that's important in this particular moment, because if we don't have corporates that are socially conscious, it's going to have an impact also on young people. Young people want to work for companies that are socially conscious. We see this in terms of how young people are giving, in terms of how they are looking at the world, but also if you look at how young people are susceptible to mental wellness these days, they can't be working in corporates that are not treating them as total human beings. So that's very important in today's world, because if we don't pay attention to that, we are going to lose an entire generation. And so corporates must invest in innovation, they must invest in ESG, but most importantly, they must invest in community development and invest in young people and make sure that the future is guaranteed. So there are a couple of other things that we can talk about, but I wanted to bring back the idea of purpose, people, and profits. Thanks.
Sure. So I was quite intrigued by the ripple laughter to the reference to the soul, to your comment, because I think what you've done is you've taken the language a little bit further. We used to talk about a corporate responsibility. And then we said maybe citizenship is a little bit better because, you know, if you're a citizen, you have a sense of responsibility and a legitimacy to be there. But soul, man, Prof, I think is going to be one of those that is going to leave us with a positive discomfort for us to engage with. But as I now come to you, Thandeka, I think it's quite important that we talk about your program, because I think it really is quite significant what Sanlam has done with this Sanlam for Youth for Tourism initiative, because it exists within the context that's been described by Nick, within the context that's been described by Prof. Tell us a little bit about the program. Tell us about how does it work, but potentially also tell us a little bit about what's made it so successful. Thanks, Tim. We can take the poll down.
So for us, as the largest non-banking financial services provider on the continent, we know that we have a responsibility. It's a huge responsibility, not only look after the monies that our clients have entrusted with us, but also to serve the communities in ensuring that there is inclusive economic growth for all. So that is the basis upon which a lot of our programs are on. And with this in particular, we looked post-COVID, we all know what happened to the tourism industry. And post that, we said, how can we play a part in ensuring that we are driving not only the economic growth for our country, but we're also doing the right thing for the communities that we serve. So we trained youth, which are an important pillar in our communities, and we gave them various skills, from content creation to baristas to various elements that are within the tourism industry. But what was powerful is that we didn't do it alone, because not us alone can fix anything. And to not also be egotistical about it,
Sure.
that we need the scale as we partner with other corporates that we are in this together. So through our youth employment services as the catalyst for us, we partnered with various corporates in South Africa, some of whom are in the room as well, where everybody contributed towards the funding for these youth. And linked to that, it just doesn't stop at training. We go the next mile to say, okay, you have received your certificate, you have received the skill, what next? Which is actually one of the challenges that we have in the country. We have a lot of youth that are sitting at home with beautiful certificates. So we then assist with opening access to markets for them. In simple ways. Right now, for us as an example, a lot of the youth that did the training for content creation, they're involved now. This Friday, we're having a shoot with our marketing department for one of the ads, and the youth are involved in that. So it's not just a singular or one instance that happens, once off. It's people that have finished the training, then they've gone into our procurement and they're in our supply chain, and we are actually using them as well. And the beauty there is it's an ecosystem look at it, so that it's not just about training, it's not just a program, it's actually an ecosystem that is not just Sanlam brand, it is other corporates within South Africa, and it's more longer term than just one program that trains and just pushes out trainees.
Thank you very much for that, because I think what you've done is literally put a ribbon around many of the conversations that we had yesterday. We kicked off with a conversation yesterday about how do we actually rally people around a common purpose. And as you talk about the work of bringing different partners around that common purpose, but also the question was raised, I think it was in the catalytic capital conversation, to say maybe just focusing on access on itself is not enough. And what I'm hearing you saying is that yes, it's access to skills plus, and so access to markets has also been an important part of the ecosystem that you've built around these young people. Nick, I want to build a little bit in around the ESG conversation, because what we know is that ESG has become a little bit more politically contested. We're seeing a lot more companies doing their work a little bit more quietly. And so the question to you is this: how is this changing how CSI is done, but also what does doing less but doing it better actually look like?
Yeah, so I think just firstly on the topic of ESG, there was some ESG pushback. And if you looked into the space, you could almost understand why. There was a lot of froth of activity going on, people reporting, adhering to codes and standards, a lot of wastage of time without real value to the business. And we spoke a lot about, Shamila yesterday spoke about purpose and how important that is. And, the issues that companies are faced are more complex day by day. Corporates are operating in a very complex space, and they need to navigate that space, and they need to have a sustainability lens to do so. And in doing that, what's required is really to understand their impacts on society, to understand how they navigate through that space through material and management of material issues, but importantly, doing things, not just talking about things.
Yeah.
And for those companies that have got a strong purpose and they're driven by purpose and they link in a sustainability agenda, I think it's a business as usual. They are still driving a sustainability agenda without just going through necessarily the focus and the distraction of filling out ESG compliance forms. If a company if you're going out writing a report and you've got to go and find someone to give you information on a particular topic, you can be sure that that topic's not being managed in the organization. So I think that it has quietened down, some of the noise has quietened down, but I think the substance has remained. And I think that CSI is a very important part of the ESG conversation, part of the mix. It's a critical element, particularly in a country where we've got these social pressures. And you see from that poll that came out, it's the one element of the sort of ESG matrix that actually extends out beyond the value chain. You're able to reach into communities, you're able to do more, you're able to be seen to be doing more, you're able to involve your staff, you're able to Becky's point, provide a mechanism to give the company some soul.
Yeah.
And it's a very important mechanism, and it's seen like that in this country. So, as I said earlier, I don't think there's a pullback on that. I think CSI is very important, an important element of that all. Doing less with doing more, I don't think that we are doing less, but I think we are focusing on whether it counts.
Sure.
And there's a strong, I think, emphasis on making sure that we can see the impact of our programs through monitoring and evaluation type programs, and leveraging that work that we do as per the Sanlam approach, bringing others into a space, and actually saying, okay, together we can actually achieve more.
Yeah.
So I think it's maybe not less, but it's certainly aiming to try and achieve more and
Yeah.
be part of the bigger solution and system, as opposed to operating as an isolated project
Sure.
on its own.
Yeah, I think the point you make about what's left is the substance really sits in the room, and it also gives me the impression that pushback is not always a bad thing, because it allows us to weed out the frivolous activity that actually isn't adding the value, so that we really get to focus on the things that matter. And that's what I'm hearing you say is where we've kind of landed with that. I want to bring a question from Laurel, Prof, to you. Laurel, thank you so much. So Laurel's back on the platform asking questions. So a quick reminder that the platform remains open to everyone. And Laurel says, one of the key gaps in the withdrawal of global funding is for social justice work that is often not the easier feel-good work, such as health, food, entrepreneurship, and education, that seems to be getting all the support from business. And the question is, are there any examples of corporates supporting more systemic and fundamental social change that you've come across?
Not at the top of my head, but I know that there are progressive corporates globally that have invested in collaborations to begin with, because I think it's important to also think about collaborations as a form of support, but as a journey towards a justice or a socially just world that you want. And so I think under the Human Global Compact, we see lots of corporates that have defined themselves along those progressive values. So I think that could be one example that we could do. But I also think during COVID, we also saw a lot of corporates that were very keen on supporting those issues that could be defined as social justice. But I think there's also this succession that is happening, not just in corporates, but also in philanthropy, a succession from your elderly owners of capital, let's say in most cases it would have been old white male, into young people. And in this case, most of the people who are taking over from their elders, usually young people who are keen on socially conscious investments. So for them, financial investment is not enough if it doesn't translate to social upliftment. Sure. And I think we should be looking into those kind of transitions that are happening at the moment around this succession debate, and then building collaborations and partnerships and solidarity with those individuals and those corporates.
So I want to bring a quick question from Tamiko to you, Prof, before I move on to Thandeka. And the question is, how will the global changes with China and the Gulf states impact CSI and sustainability in South Africa? And I think it's a good question, because we often tend just to focus on the US, maybe even the UK, of course, broadly Europe and what's happening there. But the spotlight now is what's happening in China. The spotlight is on the Gulf states. What is the thinking about how that might translate on the ground?
Yeah, so before the war in Iran, we knew already that there was a lot of movement around China, the Persian Gulf states, moving into African continent to invest, whether it's around infrastructure, and most of them, they were giving their money through government partnerships to invest in education, agriculture, among others. And other countries like Brazil had actually reopened their embassies, which they had closed before. So we know that for a fact. And we know that there's an increase in Chinese companies in African countries, in South Africa in particular. There are so many Chinese companies as we speak right now. And that has an impact on what the CSI would look like, driven by those values. We have so many studies on American companies. So that's because we've got centers that are dedicated towards that. I wish we could have invited the Chinese center from UJ to speak about whether they are actually doing studies on that, but also centers that might be coming up looking at the Persian and Gulf states and how they are investing in the African continent. I have no doubt that in the future we're going to have some particular factors and particular characteristics that are going to be defining CSI, especially driven by those type of companies. If you looked at what used to happen in Mozambique, there were lots of protests to whether it was Brazilian companies or Chinese companies around how they, for example, treat workers, etc., etc. So I think we have to look into that and maybe initiate some commission studies to see what the future will look like with more investments coming from the East.
Thank you very much. And I think, Thandeka, you get to take us home now, because what I'm hoping you'll do for us is actually land the global conversation that we've been having, almost the national conversation and the evolution that you've brought for us, Nick, and to invite Thandeka to help us think about how this should be landing at a personal leadership level with the CSI leaders in the room. And the question that I have for you is that we've heard that the environment is constrained. We've heard that the environment is uncertain. We've also heard Prof. Becky saying there are new expectations that are now, whether it's on high net worth individuals, whether it's on private sector, there are new expectations that are on the table. What is the one shift you believe that CSI leaders need to make now to stay credible and to stay effective in this moment that they find themselves in? And I mean, it could be anything from partnership models to funding flexibility and so on. But what do you think is the one thing that leaders should be thinking about at this moment?
I think as CSI leaders, we are afraid of one of Professor's 3 Ps, the big profit word, because we think we should be looking at, it's not only one element. There is an element of profit that we need to put into the conversation, because it is, yes, about enterprise growth. It is about our procurements and supply chains being improved, but it is also about growth for the business. And so it looks different for different organizations. For us, we found a way to see it in our different works that we do. We know that pipeline that we are growing, and I can therefore unlock funding because I am speaking in a way that my actuary can understand as it pertains to what he has to do when he has to shell out funding. So it's very important that we are able to speak in business words so that the people that are providing funding can effectively support us and provide funding for us so that we can really see a more strategic push towards where we're going. Of course, it's important to also look at the whole ecosystem from a perspective of what is it doing to our supply chain as well. We need to make sure that we are training people, or we are doing work that means we must see a shift in our own organizations before we can continue to ask for more funding, because the funding is at the center of it. It's important that we get the right funding from the right people, but we have to be able to factor in, of all the brilliant things that everybody is doing, we have to factor in the P.
So how I'd like to close this panel is actually go back to that first poll, and we'll do a final comment on what you think on the results. So we're going on to poll number 7, please, team. So if you can please load that poll, because I think it actually ties this conversation well. And the questions that you should be seeing coming up very shortly on your device is, which of these do you think is the biggest driver of more effective CSI? So it builds on Thandeka's idea of what is it that we need to look at. And we're already seeing a few, so I'd love to give that another 30 seconds to get more fingers on that poll. But is it about, Nick, fewer initiatives and deeper investments per projects, which was the question I was landing about, doing better while doing less? Is it about stronger measurement and clear outcomes, which is a continuation of a conversation we had yesterday around data? Is it about closer alignment with the core business strategy, Thandeka, which is what you are speaking to us now about, not being afraid of including the profit as you talk about purpose and people? Is it about greater community voice and co-creation, which of course is anchored in our theme over the last 2 days? Is it about more collaborative initiatives like the Tourism for Youth initiative, Thandeka, that you spoke about? Or is it about funding of systemic levers, like funding research, funding policy, funding advocacy, and collaboratives, which would be of interest to you as well, Prof. Bheki, as you look at it? And if we look at those numbers right now, there actually isn't a standout lead. It feels like to me it's one of those moments where we're like, we have to do everything. So if something is on 7%, let me quickly cast my vote there so that it can at least make the 7 and 8 so that it doesn't get left behind. But let's just say maybe a quarter of those who participated are saying we just need to get better at measurement and clear outcomes. That's 24%. Then we go to fewer initiatives and deeper investment per project. The lowest one is, which is still very interesting for me, 7% saying more collaborative initiatives. Isn't that interesting? So we've got 1 minute on the clock. So your reaction is literally, we've got 1.5, so 30 seconds at best. Nick, your reaction.
So, I mean, it's kind of all of the above, which is why I think you've got that. But I think the last one, funding systemic levers, and you can't do that without all the other features being in place.
Sure.
You know, it's a build program. Do what you're doing, do it well, and then look for opportunities to leverage that in terms of having a greater impact and influence.
Got you. Let's go.
I'll go with more collaborative initiatives, because this is where we're seeing real impact, not only in this program that I'm talking about, but other various programs where we partner with different people. So through that collaboration, it's not only just about our voice, it's not only our funding, it's not only our risk, but it's all shared. So I would go more for collaboration.
All right, so you would take that 7% and you'd make it a good 25, 26%. Prof, what do you make of this reading?
I mean, you trust me to say this is not representative or generalizable. Only 42 people voted. So.
Yes, Prof.
But I would go with, for me, because I really want corporates to go back to communities, I would probably look more at the greater community voice and co-creation, as well as the funding of systemic problems. But I know my time is up. We are turning 10 years old as CAPSI, and so I wanted to celebrate that together with Trialogue as well. Thank you so much.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. And I think it's a great place to also applaud the three of you for a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. Let's give them a big round of applause.